What a year this has been. Who would have believed it? Last year started out with all the jokes about 20/20 vision, seeing clearly, but it didn't stay funny very long. I remember first hearing of this strange disease in Wuhan, China. It was in the news, but I also read a blog of a missionary who lived in the city, who was in one of the apartment buildings that they completely shut down and locked them in and delivered food over their balconies. And I remember reading her blog as she tried to find God present. And it just seemed like 1,000,000 miles away. And I was like, oh man, those poor people in Wuhan. I can't even imagine what that would be like if it happened here. And then the next thing I know, they were going to shut down the Lombardy region in Italy. And I was like, how do you shut down the whole region of a whole country? How will that ever work? And then there was the horror of the first outbreak close to home at that life care center in Kirkland. And then it was everywhere. We shut down. And I couldn't imagine not being back by Easter. I mean, Easter just seemed so far off into the future. I'm like, oh, we will have been back for weeks, and we just blew by Easter. And then for a long time, I measured time by cheese. In the refrigerator here at church, for the brunch that we used to have, we buy, like everybody else, those like cheese tray things at Costco. And it was one of the last things that got left. And so I'd go in and I'd look at those cheese things, and the expiration date was August 15th. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to take this home or give it to somebody else. We will be back long before August 15th. And we kind of blew by August 15th. Thankfully, we were doing outdoor services then, so at least we could be together, but we couldn't eat. But it felt like we were living in this terrible movie. And I just found myself clinging to anything that looked like normal, anything that reminded me about how life used to be and how I hoped it would be again. And now here we are. Easter is long gone. Pentecost is long gone. Advent is long gone. Christmas is over. But at least now there's a light on the horizon. Will we get back to normal? Yes, of course we will get back to normal. It's just that normal will look a little bit different. There's so much that went on this year. There was the polarization of politics and social issues. Relationships were changed. We found that many of us could no longer agree on what a fact was or what truth was. So many of us found it impossible to have a civil conversation with people who might differ than us because of the fear of being attacked. I saw in the wider church people's canon within a canon, that is those things, those beliefs which we cherish more, those things that we believe more than other things. I saw people's canon within a canon threaten to divide the church in a way that I have never seen before. I mean, I've seen people be able to tolerate all sorts of differences. And I've seen across the country relationships being completely splintered within families and within groups because of a difference in political or social beliefs. And I've seen so many people ask the question, how can you be a Christian and fill in the blank? And now it's 2021, a new year. I hope a fresh start. At least there's always that potential that there will be a fresh start. I hope that there's a chance at some healing, a chance to remember what we've learned over this past year, and a chance to maybe make some new choices as we put what we learned into practice. In 2021, we're going to move into new territory. And so as a church, we're going to take the first couple of months of 2021 to talk about moving into that new territory. And I want to say that it's really good for us all to be together. It's been a long time since I've been up at North Campus, and this is the first time that we have shared a video with both campuses at the same time. And I'm doing this because I want everybody to hear the same thing. as I set up why we're going to be doing what we're going to be doing as a church over the next couple of months. I want you to know what my thinking is about what we're going to be studying as a whole church. Anytime that I decide to pick a sermon series, there's a lot that goes into it. I talk to a bunch of people. I hear what other people are thinking. I bounce ideas off of staff people and lay people. And I'm always asking myself, what's relevant? What areas do we need to grow in? What are people talking about? I ask, what do I feel like God is calling us as a church to? And sometimes I evaluate what I think our blind spots or our growth areas might be. And so I've been wrestling with that and praying about that and kicking it around with people for a long time. And I feel like God gave me an answer about what the next sermon series should be. And in a little while, I'll tell you what the answer is. But as I've looked over the past year and prayed over the coming one, there's a verse that popped into my head. And it comes out of 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 and following. Peter writes, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. For it is better, if it is God's will, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil." Couple of things. In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. I hope as we move forward that we will never forget this. No politician, no party, no issue is Lord. Jesus is Lord. And that's the only source of our hope. That's the only foundation of our message, that God stepped into our world, defeated sin and death, called us to himself, is changing our lives, makes new possibilities open for us, and is making all things new. And if we don't have that hope to offer, and if we're not living into it, I don't know what we have to offer to the world. Jesus is Lord. And always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. I remember thinking over the past couple of years at different points during the larger discussion of what is going on in the church, and as I talk to other people, well, first of all, before I tell you what I'm going to say, what I really want to say here is I'm so grateful to be in a church that is so fundamentally healthy on so many ways, because a lot of the issues that I'm aware of are not issues that we struggle with, but are in the larger community. And I can remember looking at what a lot of other people, a lot of other churches are doing, and I remember thinking to myself that the church is answering questions that no one is asking. The church was having all of these discussions about stuff that nobody in the culture cares about. And now, listen, I love esoterica. So I love getting together with some friends and just kicking around, how many angels can dance on the pin of a head, which is actually a very important theological question if you get far enough down this path. But if nobody in the culture, if nobody in your friend circle is talking about this stuff, then the church is wasting its time. I also think that some of the questions that we used to deal with, looking at it today, just seem quaint and naive. I think we have to be prepared to answer for the hope that lies within us about things that are relevant for today. So, what are the important questions that are being asked? And in order to know that, we have to engage with the community. We have to engage with the people around us. We have to break outside of our holy huddles and talk to other people. And what I've discovered is oftentimes that the questions just come to me when I'm involved with other people. I remember Megan and I, this is years ago when we were living in Stockton, we're just being us. We were just doing our thing in our friend group. And one of our friends stopped me one day, standing in the middle of the street, and said, "Your marriage is different. Can you tell me about what you do that makes it so successful?" And I find that as I live my life, as I try to faithfully follow Jesus, those questions just come up. And it helps me know what other people are thinking about. So how are you engaging with people? What questions are coming up? Because I think we have to constantly think about, how do we contextualize the good news about Jesus being Lord? How do we make sense of that for today? And how do we make sure that we're living and ministering in 2021, not 1970, and not even 2019? Because so many things have changed since then. And there are so many different questions that we need to address today that just weren't as pertinent even 2 years ago. Or in the way that I always like to think of it, how do we make sure that we're keeping the main thing the main thing? So right now, at the beginning of 2021, after what we have learned in 2020, we have a unique opportunity. And I look around us, even in Gig Harbor, at other church communities that are preparing to live in the past, that really believe that this will all be over and we will go back to the way things were. All of a sudden, it'll be February 2020 again, and we'll still be meeting and everything will look the same. We will never go back to the way things were. I say that not because I'm an alarmist. I'm not at all. But because we've changed and the world has changed. And at Harbor Covenant, we want to make sure that we're preparing to live and minister in the future, not in the past. I learned a lot this past year. My understanding has changed quite a bit. And each of you has had unique moments of learning and challenge and growth and development and joys and despairs. And that's changed you, and you're going to carry all of those lessons, things that you've learned, into this year too. So maybe some of these things are on your list also, but these are the things that I'm wrestling with, thinking about how they need to change us as we move forward. I learned really quickly that church ain't a building. And honestly, for years, we've talked about how much energy goes into 1 or 2 hours on a Sunday morning. And we've wondered, even just at a building facility use level, how do we leverage our building for ministry? How do we invite other people in to use the resource? And are there things that we could be doing midweek that would help disciple people, that would help grow people, that would help evangelize people? But it's always so easy to focus on 8:30 or 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Church ain't a building. And so in this crazy year, because we weren't tied to our building anymore, we discovered all sorts of avenues for ministry. We distributed gift cards, we sent meals, we bought clothing, we provided housing, we did cleaning, we did yard work, we visited people, we cared for people. We created unique activities as much as possible for adults, for students, for kids, for moms with kids, for families. When we figured out that church wasn't a building, it forced us to look at church in a different ways. And I learned that there are an awful lot of things that you can make work online. Is it always ideal? No. But for a period, you can make it work, and sometimes it works extremely well. We held prayer meetings and small groups and worship services and business meetings and youth group and children's ministries, and we even learned to bake pecan pies from Bill McCubbins. Online, people joined us at home, around the county, around the country, and even abroad. We have a growing contingent of people in India who call Harbor Covenant home. Online is huge. And if you had asked me whether I thought online presence was important 2 years ago, I would have said, yeah, we post my sermons online. I had no idea how effective online can be. I learned that community is more important than I thought, and I'm an extrovert. I love people. And I learned that we're not meant to be alone. One of the strengths of Harbor Covenant is the warmth and the hospitality of its people. When we weren't able to be together, I saw that in the chat. And I saw that in the creative ways that people connected. I saw people saying hi to each other and checking in, and it reminded me of how much we love each other but not exclusively, how good we are at enfolding other people in, because I've seen as other people have joined us, that other people in the chat are addressing them too. I can remember when the weather was better, walking around the parking lot. And I'd come around a corner and I'd see 4 people with their cars backed in together, sitting in the hatch with a blanket and a cup of coffee, talking to each other. I'd see people with lawn chairs out on their lawn and small groups meeting under the shade, having lunch together. I learned that community is important, that we're not supposed to be alone, but there's a lot of ways that we can have community. I think I learned that many of us this last year found out who we are. I think most of us are stronger and more resilient than we would have ever imagined. I learned that we have hope and that God is present. I don't minimize the pain and the suffering at all, but there were some really wonderful ministry opportunities that came about in 2020. I learned that you have to deal with reality and you have to deal with hope at the same time. And I ran across a story that I had read before about James Stockdale, who was an admiral in the United States Navy and was captured and imprisoned for 7 years in Vietnam. And during that time, he learned a lot of lessons. And later on, he was interviewed about how you survive for 7 years being tortured in a prisoner of war camp. And Stockdale said that the first people to die in captivity were the optimists, who kept thinking that things would get better quickly and that they'd be released. They were the people who thought that they'd be home by Christmas. And then when they weren't home by Christmas, he said they died of a broken heart. Stockdale argued that the key to survival was to combine realism and hope. In Stockdale's words, this is an important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with a discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. And that's what we tried to do. We tried to confront the brutal facts of a pandemic, along with deep divisions in the country. We tried to honor God in the things that we said and the choices for ministry that we made. We tried to connect people, to disciple people, and to reach out to people. Not everybody agreed with the decisions that were made, and I understand and appreciate that. We're learning and growing from that too. And now there's light at the end of the tunnel, and we can begin to turn our attention to what happens now. And we need to take what we've learned and move that into the future. So some observations about how things will be different and how we need to prepare. In person is critical. Gathering together on Sunday mornings, absolutely critical and integral to the church and its ministry. But we have to recognize that not everyone will return. Some of your friends will not be back. The Barna Group estimates that as many as 1/3 of people who attended church have stopped attending church during this pandemic. I think the Harbor Covenant has a better percentage than that, but welcoming people back, inviting them to rejoin us is going to be a challenge. And for those that don't come back, it's going to be a moment of sorrow for us, but it's going to happen. The crisis accelerated what was already happening. Church attendance was in decline. I've quoted a number of times that for the last couple of years, the statistic has been that the committed church member, not your Christmas and Easter person, but your committed church member attended church once or twice in a 2-month period. And one of the lessons that I hope that we won't lose is how much we missed being together. I'm hoping that it will affect the choices that we make moving forward when we can be mobile again. Moving forward, we've got to recognize that online is critical. It wasn't just a flash in the pan while we couldn't be in person. Online is scalable. It can be large at a worship service. It can be small for a small group or even smaller in a mentoring relationship. People can watch it everywhere and anywhere, and they do. Online is easy to invite people to. It's super accessible to younger people. And we've discovered that it is an amazing outreach and discipleship tool. But while online works, it's a challenge to develop community. And we're going to have to wrestle with that. It's not impossible, but we have to be intentional about it, and it will look different because we don't want people just showing up for an online worship service, not connecting to anybody, and leaving again. We don't want that any more than we want people to show up on a Sunday morning, not talk to anybody, get in their car, and leave. In fact, I believe that online will end up being a separate campus for us, and we have to figure that out. We have to figure out how video will work. We have to figure out how we'll produce what needs to be produced and care for people that are on our online community. A challenge moving forward for us is the sociological and the political strife. Huge economic issues have been raised. We are wrestling with racial righteousness that we need to continue to wrestle with. We can't forget about that. We need to navigate this political divide that has caused so much pain in relationships in our country. And I sense that there is a real opportunity, but also a real threat in the challenges of remaining a multi-generational church, because I see the potential for an enormous fracture line between older people and younger people. And unless we take care of that and intentionally engage with one another, I think that will be a real threat for our church. I think we need to continue to look at the great need in the culture, financial, sociological, hopelessness. As the financial things particularly shake out, we're going to see deeper things that the economic crisis has made more obvious. And we're going to have to ask ourselves, how will we respond to that? And with all of those things that are challenges and opportunities moving forward, my fear is that the church will turn back in on itself. I read articles and saw so much on social media from Christians that even though it was couched in very spiritual language, was essentially give me what I want when I want it. And we're going to have to remind ourselves of the hard work of dying to ourselves and following Jesus. My fear is that we will compromise the gospel. My fear is that we'll forget what the gospel is. Now, we know far too much spiritual language to actually say that, but on a practical level, we could do it if we decide that all we care about is the people that are already within the church. Because once we turn inward is when we will begin to die, because we will keep turning further inward, and some of the other splits and possible chasms that I already mentioned will occur. This is why I believe that we are at a crucial juncture. We are moving into new territory, and if we want to retain our relevancy, if we want to keep making a difference for the kingdom of God, we need to be intentional about our thoughts and intentional about our actions. And so this is what we're going to do. This is the thing that I believe God gave to me. We're going to join another group of people who are moving into new territory. And we're going to do this by studying the book of Deuteronomy. I'll pause while everyone goes, "What?" Here's why. Deuteronomy is what is given to the people of God when they are ready to go in and take the land. Deuteronomy is summing up everything that has happened to date to remind the people of where they've been, what they've learned, what they shouldn't do, what they should do, to remind them of what is the most important, to remind them who they are as the people of God. Deuteronomy is the last words that they hear before they go in to the new territory. Deuteronomy has been called the Gospel of Moses because it's actually like a collection of sermons that are attributed to Moses as he gives the final charge to the people of God. We've wandered around in the desert, and now it's time for us to move into the new territory. It's going to be different, it's going to be unique, and here's what we have to remember. Here's what you need to not forget. Here's what you need to know. And so we're going to join the people of Deuteronomy as they move into the new territory. And we're going to learn what we need to know as we move into the new territory of this coming year and where our society and our world is. So here's my challenge to you today. Read the book of Deuteronomy several times. I would challenge you to read it in one sitting. It'll probably take you 2.5 hours. It's a discipline, it's a challenge. Not everybody can, but many of you will. And I think that you'll find a richness with it if you sit through the whole thing. I would encourage you to listen to the book of Deuteronomy. It was a sermon. It was meant to be heard. Listen to what it must have been like to stand there and hear these words. I encourage you to read it in whatever way you can. Break it up into chapters. Break it up into manageable pieces. But find different ways to immerse yourself in the story. And I'll be very honest, we're not going to do the whole book. We're going to do about the first 11 chapters, and then at the end, in the middle is laws, which are important, which is great, but we'll tackle those in a different way. So in the middle, I encourage you to read that, but you can skim a little bit there. But Deuteronomy will help remind us of what's important as we enter into this new territory. And we want to remember what's important for us as we move into 2021 so that we can point people to the hope that we have in Christ and answer their questions with relevance. So here are the 3 questions for you today. What did you learn this past year? Number 2, what are the questions that you think people will be asking in 2021? And number 3, what do you need to remember as we move into new territory?